I didn't scream when I saw the number, I actually laughed. A small, tired laugh, ha ha ha, the kind of laugh that slips out when your heart doesn't know what else to do. $42,000. I stared at the screen again, thinking maybe my eyes were tired, maybe I pressed something wrong, maybe the bank app was glitching, but no, the number stayed there, still, quiet, heavy. And it was under my name at first. I told myself it had to be a mistake. I live a simple life, I don't have fancy shopping habits, I don't go on expensive vacations. My biggest monthly expense is groceries and my electricity bill, so when I saw multiple credit cards listed under my account that I didn't recognize, I felt something cold settle in my chest. A slow, uncomfortable chill. I whispered to myself, this can't be right, and then I clicked further 3 credit cards, opened over the last 8 months, all under my name, all with balances, large balances. I felt my fingers tremble just slightly as I scrolled. Restaurants I've never been to, electronics I've never bought, airline tickets I never booked. My heart started beating faster, not wild, not dramatic, just heavy, like each beat was carrying something painful, and then I saw one small detail that made my breath stop. The phone number attached to the account notifications wasn't mine. It was his. My son is in his 30s now. He still lives with me. I always told myself that times are harder for young people. Rent is expensive, jobs are unstable. It's okay, I would say, stay until you're stable. I meant it. I didn't mind cooking for 2. I didn't mind hearing his footsteps down the hallway at night. I liked knowing he was home safe. A mother doesn't stop being a mother just because her child turns 30. Oh, I wish that was the full truth. I sat there for a long time just staring at that phone number. I didn't cry, not yet. I didn't call him into the room. I didn't even confront him. Instead, I went to the kitchen and made tea. Yes, tea. Isn't that strange? $42,000 in debt in my name and I'm boiling water. I could almost hear my late husband's voice saying, think before you act. So I sat at the table with my tea, steam rising between me and the truth I was slowly accepting. He had opened credit cards in my name. The thought felt sharp. It didn't fit inside my mind at first. This is the same boy who used to hold my hand when crossing the street, the same child who would cry if he thought he disappointed me. I remember him at 7 years old, apologizing for breaking a plate. And now, this, I heard his bedroom door close down the hallway, normal, casual, like nothing was wrong. That sound made something shift inside me. Because if this was a mistake, he would have told me. If this was temporary, he would have explained. If he respected me, I wouldn't be finding out from a bank notification. Still, I told myself there must be some explanation. Maybe he planned to tell me, maybe he was embarrassed, maybe he was drowning in something I didn't see. A mother's mind is creative when it wants to protect her child. We can excuse almost anything when it's our own blood. I went back to the app and checked the dates. The first card was opened 9 months ago. That means he had been living here, eating at my table, watching television with me in the evenings while building debt in my name. Month after month, swipe after swipe, that's when something painful but clear formed inside my chest. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a decision repeated many times. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the distance. I kept asking myself one question: when did I become someone he thought he could use? It's funny how betrayal doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just sits quietly beside you in the dark. I kept remembering small things: the new phone he suddenly had, the weekend trip he took, the way he brushed off money conversations. I thought he had picked up extra freelance work. He told me he was figuring things out. Ha ha ha, I believed him. The next morning he walked into the kitchen like always. Morning, Mom, casual, normal. He poured cereal into a bowl. I watched him. I searched his face for guilt, for fear, for anything, but he looked relaxed, comfortable. That hurt more than the number on the screen. I almost said something right then. The words were at the edge of my tongue, but something stopped me, not fear. Not weakness, something else. I wanted to see how far this would go. I wanted to know if he would tell me on his own. So instead, I smiled. A small one, and I asked about his plans for the day. He talked about meeting a friend. About maybe applying for a new job, normal things, and as he spoke, I felt tears rise in my eyes, but I blinked them away. Not yet, not in front of him. After he left the house, I went back to the table and opened my notebook. I wrote down every account number, every date, every balance. $42,000, I whispered it again. 42,000. The number sounded unreal in my quiet kitchen. If you've ever trusted someone completely, you know this feeling. That slow realization that trust isn't something that breaks loudly, it cracks softly, and you only notice when you lean on it and almost fall. I kept asking myself, do I protect him? Or do I protect myself? Because here is the truth no one likes to say out loud: when your own child crosses a line like this, you don't just lose money, you lose innocence. You lose the version of them you carried in your heart, and I wasn't sure which loss hurt more. I thought about confronting him immediately. I imagined him saying, "It's temporary." I imagined him brushing it off. I imagined him asking me to just trust him. And I realized something important. He already knew I would hesitate. He thought I wouldn't notice. That assumption told me more than the debt did. By the afternoon, I had made a quiet decision. I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't accuse, I wouldn't cry in front of him, not yet. I needed more information. I needed to understand exactly how deep this went, because when I looked again at the statements, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten even more. The last charge was just 3 days ago, which meant this wasn't over. And that was the moment I understood. The debt wasn't the worst part. It was what he believed about me that hurt the most. But what I found the next day would make this feel small. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I didn't even need an alarm. My eyes just opened like my body already knew something was wrong. The house was quiet, too quiet. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling again, feeling that same heavy pressure in my chest. $42,000. The number kept repeating in my mind like a clock ticking too loudly. Tick, tick, tick. I sighed and sat up slowly. Today I needed answers. I made coffee instead of tea this time. Strong coffee, the kind that burns a little when you swallow it. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, determined to look deeper. I logged into my credit report. My hands were steady now, not shaking, not crying, just calm, almost too calm. That scared me a little. Calm can mean strength, but it can also mean something inside you is breaking quietly. When the full report loaded, my stomach dropped. There weren't just 3 cards, there were 5. 2 had been opened and closed already. Closed because they were maxed out. I actually covered my mouth with my hand. Oh my God, I whispered. The first card was opened almost a year ago. That meant this started earlier than I thought, earlier than the new phone, earlier than the weekend trip, earlier than the I'm figuring things out conversations. This had been happening right under my roof for almost 12 months, and then I saw something that made my chest tight. Even more late payments, not just spending. Not just borrowing, but missed payments under my name. My credit score, the one I worked on for decades, had dropped almost 120 points. 120. I let out a small laugh again, but it wasn't funny this time. Ha ha ha, it sounded empty. I've always paid my bills on time, always, even when money was tight, even after my husband passed away. Even when I had to choose between new clothes and keeping the lights on, I never let my credit slip. And now, because of him, I felt tears fill my eyes, and this time I didn't blink them away. They slid down slowly, quiet tears. The kind that come from deep disappointment, not loud anger. I started clicking into individual statements. Restaurants, electronics stores, online shopping sites, gas stations across town. There was even a small vacation rental charge from 3 months ago. I remembered that weekend. He told me he was staying with a friend. I had even packed him snacks for the road. I closed my eyes tightly for a second. The memory felt different now. Warped. Then something else caught my attention. One of the application confirmations showed an email address. It wasn't mine, it was his. He didn't even try to hide it carefully. He just assumed I wouldn't look. That hurt more than the debt. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't panic, it was confidence. Confidence that I wouldn't check, confidence that I would trust him blindly. And maybe that's the part that stung the most, because he was right. I never questioned him. Around noon, I heard him wake up. His door opened, footsteps down the hallway. The smell of toast filled the kitchen. Normal sounds, everyday sounds. And I sat there with printed pages of evidence spread across the table. My heart was pounding now, not from shock, from clarity. He walked in, stretching. "Morning," he said casually, rubbing his eyes. I looked at him for a second longer than usual. I studied his face, 30-something years old, stubble on his chin, still my baby, but also a grown man who knew exactly what he was doing. "Morning," I replied softly. He grabbed his phone from the counter. That same phone, probably bought with my credit. I wondered if he ever felt guilty when he scrolled on it, if he ever looked at me and felt even a small pinch in his chest. Or if he simply told himself a story, that he'd fix it later, that it wasn't a big deal, that Mom wouldn't mind. He started talking about meeting someone later. I barely heard the words. I was watching his hands, steady, relaxed. Not nervous, and that told me something important. He didn't think I knew. There's something powerful about being the only one in the room who knows the truth. It's heavy, but it's powerful. I realized in that moment that I had the advantage now. He believed he was in control, but he wasn't anymore. After he left the kitchen, I gathered the papers and went to my room. I closed the door and sat on my bed. I let myself cry fully this time, not loud, just soft weeping. My shoulders shaking slightly. "Where did I go wrong?" I whispered. Every mother asks that question when something breaks with their child. We blame ourselves first, always, but as the tears slowed, another thought slowly replaced that one. He made a choice. He wasn't a teenager. He wasn't confused about right and wrong. He filled out forms. He entered my social security number. He signed digitally. He activated cards. He swiped them. Again and again. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern, and patterns don't stop unless something interrupts them. I picked up my phone and searched something that made my heart race. What happens if someone opens credit cards in your name? The answers weren't gentle. Identity fraud. Financial crime, legal consequences, possible charges, investigation. The words felt heavy on the screen. I put the phone down quickly, almost like it burned me. Legal consequences. I didn't want to imagine police, courtrooms. Shame? No, that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. I wanted him to understand that I am not someone you use, and that's when I noticed one more detail on the statements. A new card had been approved, but not activated yet. The approval date was yesterday, which meant while I was lying awake in my bed, heart aching, he was still applying for more credit in my name. I felt something shift inside me completely then. The sadness hardened, not into anger, into resolve. He wasn't planning to stop, and if I stayed silent, this number wouldn't stay at 42,000. It would grow. I looked around my bedroom. The framed family photos, the old dresser, the quiet life I built after losing my husband. I worked too hard for this stability. I sacrificed too much. And suddenly, the choice became clearer. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, and what I decided to do next would change the way my son looked at me forever. I didn't confront him that day. I know some people would have marched straight into his room, papers in hand, voice raised, demanding answers. But I didn't. I've learned something over the years: when you react too quickly, you lose power. And I needed power, not anger, not tears, control. That evening, he was sitting on the couch watching television like always, one leg crossed over the other, scrolling on his phone during commercials. I stood in the hallway for a second just watching him, my son, 30-something years old, comfortable, safe, under my roof, living in a house built on trust he didn't even realize he had already cracked. I walked in slowly and sat in the chair across from him. "Can I ask you something?" I said, keeping my voice soft. He didn't even look up at first. "Yeah, sure." I took a breath, slow, steady. "Have you opened any credit cards recently?" That got his attention. His eyes flicked up quickly, just for a second, then he shrugged. "Yeah, a couple." "Why?" My heart thumped once, hard. But I stayed calm. "In whose name?" There was a pause, a tiny one, so small someone else might miss it, but I didn't. He smiled slightly, almost amused. "Mom, relax, it's just temporary." "Temporary," he said it so casually. Like we were talking about borrowing a sweater, not borrowing someone's identity. I felt a small wave of disbelief wash over me. "Ha, temporary. $42,000 temporary. In whose name?" I repeated, still calm. He sighed like I was being dramatic. "Yours, but listen, it's not a big deal. My credit score was bad. I just needed something to get back on my feet. I'm going to pay it off." I stared at him. I searched his face for shame, for apology, for even a flicker of guilt. There was none, just irritation that I was asking. "You used my information without telling me," I said quietly. "It's not like I stole it," he snapped back lightly. "I live here, we're family." I was going to handle it. Family, that word hit differently, because family is supposed to mean protection, not permission. "How much?" I asked. He rolled his eyes slightly. "Mom, don't start." "It's under control." "How much?" I repeated, my voice firmer now. He hesitated again. "Like, I don't know, 30-something, 42,000, I said. That made him blink. For the first time, his confidence shifted just a little. "You checked?" "Yes," I replied. Silence filled the room. The television kept playing in the background, laughter from a sitcom echoing strangely between us. I could almost laugh at the irony. Ha, a comedy playing while my life felt like a quiet tragedy. "It's temporary," he repeated, but softer now. "I just needed to get through some stuff. I was going to fix it before you noticed." Before I noticed, that sentence stayed in the air between us. He truly believed I wouldn't look, that I wouldn't check, that I would just exist quietly while he used my name like it was his. "You missed payments," I said gently. He looked annoyed again. "It's just late fees." "I'll handle it." "You opened another card yesterday," I added. That's when his jaw tightened. "Why are you digging like this? You don't trust me?" I almost laughed again, but it would have sounded broken. "Trust you," I whispered. "You didn't trust me enough to tell me." He leaned back into the couch and crossed his arms, defensive now. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd overreact." Overreact? I felt something inside me shift at that word. A small crack sealing itself shut. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I was sitting calmly, asking basic questions, and somehow I was the dramatic one. "I would have paid it back," he insisted. "You act like I committed a crime." I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at him, and in that moment I realized something painful. He didn't see this as betrayal. He saw it as convenience. "You used my social security number," I said slowly. "You signed my name. That's not borrowing. That's not temporary. That's not a small thing." He shook his head. "You're making it bigger than it is." No, he was making it smaller than it was. That realization hurt more than anything else he had said, because if he couldn't see the seriousness now, what would stop him from doing it again? "From pushing further next time. I need you to close the accounts," I said finally. "I will," he replied quickly. "Just give me time." "How much time?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up. "I don't want to argue about this," I said. "I'll handle it." And just like that, he walked down the hallway to his room. Door closed. Conversation over. I sat there alone, staring at the television that I wasn't watching. My hands felt cold, my chest felt tight again. I wanted him to say sorry just once. I wanted him to say, "Mom, I messed up." I would have forgiven him in a second if he had shown real regret, but he didn't. Instead, he minimized. Deflected, turned it back on me. That night I lay awake again, not crying this time, thinking he believed this would fade, that I would calm down and let it go. That my love for him would silence my instinct to protect myself, and that's when something very clear formed in my mind. If I protected him from consequences now, I would be teaching him that he can do this again, maybe not to me next time, maybe to someone else, and that thought scared me more than the debt, because $42,000 can be repaid. Character cannot. I realized then that I had been approaching this wrong. I was still speaking to him like he was a teenager who made a mistake, but he wasn't a child. He was a grown man who made repeated choices, and if he thought I wouldn't go further than a conversation, he didn't know me as well as he thought. The next morning, I made a quiet phone call that would change everything, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of necessity, and when someone else asked him questions instead of me, his voice would not sound so confident anymore. The next morning the house felt different, not louder, not tense, just thinner, like the air itself was waiting. He was still asleep when I walked into the kitchen. I didn't make coffee this time, I didn't turn on the television. I sat down with my phone in my hand and stared at the number I had searched the night before, the bank's fraud department. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. I could still stop. I could still pretend this was just family business. I could still protect him from the outside world. That's what mothers do, right? We soften the fall, but then I remembered the missed payments. The new card opened yesterday. The way he said, "You're overreacting," and something inside me settled. I pressed call. The ringing felt louder than it should have, each tone echoing in my chest. When a woman answered, her voice was calm, professional, almost gentle. "Fraud department, how can I help you today?" she said. For a second I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, I swallowed. "I need to report accounts that were opened in my name without my permission," I said carefully. Even saying those words out loud felt strange. Without my permission, it made everything real. She asked me a series of verification questions. My full name, date of birth, address, the last 4 digits of my social security number. I answered each one clearly, steady voice, no shaking. I surprised myself. Then she began listing the accounts. "Yes, I see 5 credit cards here," she said. 2 closed, 3 active. Total balance approximately $42,360. Hearing it spoken by someone else made my chest tighten again. 42,360. So exact, so real. "Did you personally apply for these accounts?" she asked. There it was, the question. "No," I replied. Silence on the line for a second as she typed. I could hear faint keyboard clicks. That small sound felt like a door slowly closing behind something. "Do you know who may have opened them?" she asked next. My heart pounded harder now. This was the moment that separated suspicion from action. I looked down at my kitchen table, at the sunlight hitting the surface like any normal day. My son was asleep down the hallway, probably dreaming peacefully. And here I was about to shift something that couldn't be undone. "I believe it was someone in my household," I said carefully. She didn't sound shocked, she didn't judge. "Understood," she replied. "We can begin an investigation. That will require the accounts to be frozen immediately. It may also involve contacting the individual linked to the applications." Contacting, the word echoed in my head. "If we determine identity theft occurred," she continued, "you will be asked whether you wish to file a formal fraud affidavit. That can lead to further legal steps. Are you prepared to proceed?" Prepared. Was I prepared for my son to receive a call from a fraud investigator? Was I prepared for him to realize this wasn't just a family discussion anymore? My stomach flipped, a small tear slipped down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly. "I don't want to press charges," I said softly. "I just want the accounts handled. I want the debt removed from my name." "That is possible," she replied, "but if fraud is confirmed, responsibility may shift to the individual who opened the accounts." Responsibility, that word felt heavy but also fair. "Yes," I said after a long pause. "Begin the investigation." As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt something unexpected. Relief, not happiness. Not revenge, just relief, like I had finally stepped out of a fog. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't attacking him. I was simply correcting something wrong. She placed the accounts under review immediately. All cards frozen. All activity stopped. She explained that the person connected to the application phone number and email would likely be contacted within a few business days for verification. Within a few business days, I thanked her quietly and ended the call. My hand trembled slightly as I set the phone down. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The kitchen felt still again. Down the hallway, I heard his bedroom door open. Footsteps. He walked into the kitchen stretching, completely unaware that something had just shifted under his feet. "Morning," he said casually. "Morning," I replied, my voice steady. He grabbed a glass and poured water. I watched him carefully. I wondered what he would look like when someone else, not his mother, asked him about those accounts. When someone used words like fraud, verification, liability. Would he still say it was temporary? Would he still accuse me of overreacting? I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not cold, not cruel, just firm. For the first time since I discovered the debt, I wasn't drowning in confusion. I had taken action. Quiet action. He sat at the table scrolling through his phone again. The same phone probably linked to those credit applications. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost, because I knew what was coming and he didn't, and that knowledge changed the balance between us. That afternoon, I received an email confirming the fraud investigation had begun. It explained the next steps clearly. If the applications were proven unauthorized, the balances would be removed from my credit file. But the applicant could face consequences depending on how the case unfolded. Consequences. I read that word over and over again. I wasn't doing this to punish him. I wasn't doing this to embarrass him. I was doing this because he needed to feel the weight of his choices from someone who wasn't emotionally tied to him, because when I asked him, he minimized it. When I asked him, he brushed it off. When the bank asks him, it won't sound the same. That evening, he seemed slightly restless. Checking his phone more often. Maybe he received a notification already. Maybe one of the cards declined at a store. I didn't ask, I didn't hint, I simply made dinner like always. Rice, vegetables. Quiet routine. He glanced at me once like he wanted to say something. But he didn't, and as I washed the dishes later that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Strength, not loud strength, not dramatic. Just steady, because I knew something he didn't. Soon, someone else would be asking him questions, and when they did, his voice would not sound the same. The next 2 days felt strangely normal, and that was the unsettling part. He laughed at something on his phone. He went out with friends. He even asked me what we were having for dinner, like nothing in the world had shifted. I almost admired the confidence. Or maybe it wasn't confidence, maybe it was denial. Sometimes people act normal because they believe consequences are just words. I watched him carefully, saying very little, keeping everything inside. I wasn't angry anymore. I was observant. On the third day, I heard it. His phone rang while he was in the kitchen. I was in the living room, pretending to read. He looked at the screen, and for a second his eyebrows pulled together. Unknown number, he answered casually. Hello. There was a pause. Yes, this is he. Another pause. His posture changed slightly, not dramatic. Just a small straightening of his back. I'm sorry, what is this regarding? I couldn't hear the other side, but I didn't need to. I knew. His voice shifted, just a little lower now. No, I didn't. I applied, but it wasn't fraud. Silence again. My heart beat steadily, not fast, not panicked, just steady. I kept my eyes on the book in my hands, even though I wasn't reading a single word. It's my mom, he said suddenly. We live together, she knows. Another pause. No, she didn't give written permission, but it's not like that. There it was, the confidence cracking. I heard him move toward the hallway. His voice dropped further, like he didn't want me to hear. But walls are thin and truth carries. I was going to pay it back, he insisted quietly. It's temporary, that word again, but this time it didn't sound confident, it sounded defensive. Almost small. After a few minutes, he ended the call. The house went silent, heavy silent. I could almost feel the air thickening between rooms. He walked into the living room slowly. I looked up calmly. What's wrong? I asked gently. He stared at me for a second, searching my face. Did you call the bank? There it was, direct. Yes, I said simply. His jaw tightened. You reported it as fraud. I reported accounts opened without my permission, I replied, keeping my tone even. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. Mom, are you serious right now? Do you realize how bad this looks? I almost smiled at the irony. How bad it looks. You could have just talked to me again, he snapped. I did talk to you, I said quietly. You told me it was temporary, he exhaled sharply. Frustrated, angry, but underneath that anger I saw it fear. Saying this could become a legal issue, he said, his voice dropping. Why would you do that to me? Why would I do that to you? The question hung in the air like smoke. I stood up slowly. My knees felt steady, my voice didn't shake. I didn't do this to you, I said softly. You did this, I corrected it. He shook his head. You're overreacting, it's family, people don't report family. That sentence hit deep. Because for a moment I almost doubted myself. Mothers are trained to absorb damage quietly, to protect their children even when it hurts us. But I reminded myself protecting him from consequences would only teach him that love equals permission. I am not pressing charges, I said calmly. I told them that, but the debt will not stay in my name. He stopped pacing and stared at me. So what, you want them to come after me? I want you to understand this is serious, I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt smaller somehow. The space between us felt wider. He looked different now. Not like a confident grown man brushing off a conversation. He looked unsettled. They froze the cards, he muttered. I tried to use one today, I nodded slowly. Yes, he let out a short laugh, but it wasn't amused. You could ruin my life over this, I swallowed. No, your choices could. That landed. He didn't yell, he didn't slam doors. Instead, he sat down heavily on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. For the first time since this began, he looked small, not like a child. but like someone who finally realized the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he thought. I was going to fix it, he repeated quietly. When? I asked gently. He didn't answer, and that silence told me everything. If you're listening right now and you've ever faced a moment where someone you love crossed a line, you know this feeling. That pull between protecting them and protecting yourself. It's not easy, it's heavy, and sometimes it feels lonely. If stories like this speak to you, if you understand the quiet strength it takes to draw a boundary, subscribe, and stay. There are more truths we don't talk about enough. He finally looked up at me again. What happens now? That question sounded different from everything else he'd said, not defensive, not dismissive. Just uncertain now, I replied softly. The bank investigates, they'll ask you questions, you answer honestly, and if they decide it's fraud, then you face whatever comes with that, I said gently. Like an adult, his face shifted at that word. Adult, maybe that's what this was really about. He wanted the freedom of adulthood without the responsibility. I can't believe you did this, he muttered again. I walked toward the kitchen slowly. I can't believe you did this either, I whispered back. That night the house felt different. Not broken, just exposed. Truth has a way of stripping away comfort. He stayed in his room most of the evening. I heard him on the phone, speaking in low tones, probably explaining, probably minimizing again. I didn't listen closely this time. I didn't need to because something had shifted permanently. He no longer believed I wouldn't act, and the next call he received would make that reality even clearer. The next morning I woke up to silence again, but it wasn't the same kind as before. This silence felt tense, like something was waiting to happen. I lay there for a moment, staring at the wall, listening carefully. No television. No kitchen sounds, no footsteps. He was awake, though. I could feel it. When a house holds tension, you can sense it in the air. I stepped into the hallway and noticed his bedroom door was slightly open. That alone told me something. He usually kept it closed. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. I wasn't afraid anymore. That surprised me. A few minutes later, he walked out slowly. No mourning, no casual energy. His face looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from stress. Calling again today, he said flatly. I nodded. Okay. He watched me carefully, almost like he expected me to look guilty. I didn't. They said they need a recorded statement, he added. Then give one, I replied gently. He let out a frustrated sigh. You don't understand how serious this is. I looked at him quietly. I do, and I did. That was the difference. I had already sat with the seriousness. I had already cried about it. I had already faced it alone at my kitchen table. Now it was his turn. His phone rang around noon. This time he didn't step into the hallway. He answered right there in the living room. I stayed in the kitchen, not hiding, not hovering, just existing. Yes, he said, voice tight. I understand it's recorded. A pause. No, she didn't give written permission. Longer pause. I live with her. I had access to her documents. Even from the other room, I felt the weight of those words. Access to her documents. That's how casually trust gets turned into opportunity. He began pacing slowly as he spoke. I intended to repay it. I wasn't trying to hurt her. His voice cracked slightly on that sentence, just slightly. It was the first time I heard emotion that wasn't anger. Another long pause. I didn't think she'd report it. There it was. He didn't think I'd report it. The assumption that I would protect him no matter what. That I would choose silence over accountability. That love meant no consequences. His tone grew smaller as the call continued. I understand, yes, I understand the balance, yes, I know the amount. He stopped pacing. Just stood still, yes, I accept responsibility. That sentence hit me harder than anything else so far. Accept responsibility. It sounded foreign coming from him. But real. After a few more minutes, he ended the call slowly. The house felt heavy again, but not chaotic, just exposed. He stood there for a moment before looking toward the kitchen. They're removing it from your credit, he said quietly. I nodded once, but they said the debt shifts to me. Another nod. He swallowed. 42,000. Yes, hearing him say the number out loud was different. It wasn't casual anymore. It wasn't brushed off, it was heavy now. They said if I don't arrange payment plans, it could escalate, he added. I stayed calm. Then arrange them. He stared at me like he was seeing me differently for the first time. Not as just mom, not as the safety net, but as someone who wouldn't bend. Why didn't you just give me time? He asked, and this time it wasn't anger, it was confusion. Because you opened another card the day I found out, I replied gently. That told me time wouldn't fix this. He didn't argue. That silence felt honest. He sat down slowly on the couch, hands clasped together. I messed up, he said quietly. It was small, not dramatic. But it was the first true acknowledgement. I felt my chest tighten again, but not from pain this time. From release. Yes, I said softly. You did. He rubbed his face with both hands. I didn't think it through. No, I replied. You didn't. There were no raised voices, no shouting, just truth sitting between us. Raw, uncomfortable. He looked up again. Are you going to kick me out? The question surprised me. No, I said calmly. But things are changing. That word changing hung in the room. I'll pay the debt, you'll rebuild your credit properly, and you will never use my name again for anything without asking. Ever? He nodded slowly. and I added gently, you'll understand that trust doesn't come back automatically. That one hurt him. I could see it because money can be repaid, trust has to be rebuilt. If you're listening right now, you already know sometimes the hardest part isn't the loss of money. It's realizing someone thought you wouldn't stand up for yourself, and if you've ever had to choose strength over comfort, stay with this story, because what happened next surprised even me. He went quiet after that conversation, not angry. Not defensive, just quiet. I could tell something was shifting inside him. Maybe for the first time, he saw the situation without excuses. That night, he knocked on my bedroom door softly, and what he said next changed the entire direction of our relationship. That knock on my bedroom door was softer than I had ever heard from him. Not rushed, not impatient, just hesitant. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, folding laundry, pretending my hands weren't slightly trembling. Come in, I said. He opened the door slowly, like he wasn't sure he was welcome. For a second, he just stood there. 30-something years old, taller than me, broader than me, and yet he looked like the little boy who once stood in this same doorway after breaking a lamp. Back then he had cried immediately. This time he didn't cry, he just swallowed hard. Can we talk? He asked quietly. I nodded and gestured for him to sit. He sat on the chair near my dresser, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Silence stretched between us for a few seconds. It wasn't hostile silence, it was uncomfortable honesty trying to form. Been thinking, he said finally, about everything. I didn't interrupt. I didn't realize how bad it looked until today, he continued. When they said the words identity fraud out loud, it hit different. I let out a small sigh. I know, he rubbed his hands together nervously. I never thought of it like that, I just thought we're family. It's not like I was stealing from a stranger. That sentence could have hurt, but instead it clarified something. That's exactly why it hurts more, I said softly, because we're family. He looked up at me then, really looked. His eyes were red around the edges like he hadn't been sleeping well either. I didn't think you'd actually report it, he admitted. I know, I replied, and that's what scares me. That surprised me. Scares you? He nodded slowly. It made me realize I don't really see you as someone who would push back. I guess I just thought you'd always protect me. There it was, the truth. I felt a mixture of sadness and clarity. I have protected you your whole life, I said gently, but protecting you from consequences is not love, it's damage. He didn't argue this time. Been irresponsible, he said quietly, with money, with decisions. With you, hearing him say that made my chest tighten again, not from betrayal this time, but from grief. Because sometimes when our children finally understand, it hurts in a different way. It means they've crossed a line they can't uncross. I was embarrassed about my credit, he continued. I didn't want you to see me failing. I nodded slowly. So you hid it. Yes, and then you made it worse, he swallowed. Yes, silence again, but this silence felt different, less sharp. I'll call them tomorrow, he said. Set up payment plans, I'll pick up extra work, I'll sell the motorcycle if I have to. That caught my attention. He loved that motorcycle. It was his pride. You don't have to sell everything, I said calmly, but you do have to fix what you broke, he nodded firmly. I will. For the first time since this started, I believed him, not because he promised, but because his tone had changed. There was no minimizing, no blaming, no temporary, just acceptance. I'm sorry, he said finally. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was simple. Honest, and that hit me harder than the $42,000 ever did. I felt tears rise in my eyes again. I needed to hear that, I whispered. He wiped his face quickly, embarrassed by his own emotion. I don't want you to look at me differently. I didn't answer right away because the truth mattered more than comfort. I do look at you differently, I said gently. His shoulders dropped slightly, but not because you made a mistake, I continued. Because you're choosing how you respond to it. He looked up again, unsure. You can let this define you as someone who uses people, I said, or you can let this be the moment you grow up. He nodded slowly. You're not a child anymore, I added. You don't get to make child-sized excuses. A small, sad laugh escaped him. Yeah, I figured that out today. We sat there quietly for a moment. The air felt lighter somehow, not healed, but clearer. If you're listening to this and you've ever been forced to choose between comfort and growth, I would say softly, know that growth rarely feels gentle at first. Sometimes it feels like loss, sometimes it feels like confrontation. But it's necessary. And if stories like this resonate with you, stories about boundaries, about hard love, about choosing strength, subscribe and stay, because this isn't just about money. It's about becoming someone better. He stood up slowly. I don't expect you to trust me right away, he said. Good, I replied. That made him pause. Trust isn't automatic, I explained. It's rebuilt. He nodded again. I'll earn it. That sentence felt different from everything else. Not a promise, a commitment. After he left my room, I sat there alone for a while. I let myself cry again, quiet weeping, not because I lost money. Not because I reported him, but because motherhood changes in stages. And tonight, it had shifted from protection to boundaries. The next few weeks would test both of us in ways we didn't expect, because apologizing is one thing, living differently is another. The next few weeks were not dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, no police showing up. On the outside, life looked almost normal again, but underneath that surface, everything had changed. You can feel it when trust has been cracked. It's like walking on a floor that was once solid but now makes a slight sound under your weight. Not broken, just different. He called the bank the very next morning like he said he would. I was in the kitchen when I heard him speaking in a firm, serious tone. No excuses this time, no temporary, just numbers, payment plans, interest rates, deadlines. I didn't listen closely, but I heard enough to know he wasn't running from it anymore. Later that afternoon, he came into the living room holding a sheet of paper. They set up a structured repayment plan, he said quietly. It's going to take years, $42,000 doesn't disappear in a few months. That's not a small lesson, that's long-term consequence. I picked up 2 extra shifts already, he added. And I'm applying for a second job, I nodded slowly. Good, there was no celebration in my voice, no praise, just acknowledgement. This wasn't something to applaud, it was something to correct. He seemed to understand that. Over the next days I noticed small changes. He stopped ordering takeout, he canceled subscriptions. I saw him listing his motorcycle online. When I realized he was serious about selling it, something inside me tightened. That motorcycle was the one thing he talked about with pride, the one purchase he had made legally in his own name. Watching him photograph it for sale felt symbolic. You don't have to sell it immediately, I said softly one evening. He shook his head. I do, and for the first time I saw something that wasn't guilt. Responsibility, that word had been missing for a long time. One night, while we were eating dinner quietly, he put his fork down and looked at me. I keep thinking about something, he said. What? I asked. When I told the bank I had access to your documents, I realized how easily I justified it in my head. I told myself it wasn't stealing because we're family. I stayed quiet, but I never asked myself how it would feel if you did that to me, he continued. That sentence lingered in the air because that's what empathy is, imagining the reversal. I would have been furious, he admitted. I would have felt betrayed. Yes, I said gently. You would have. He looked down at his plate. I didn't think about your side at all, and that was the real problem, not the money, the absence of perspective. He started coming home earlier, spending more time at the table with me, not because I forced him, but because something inside him seemed to shift. He was quieter now, more thoughtful. One evening, I found him sitting alone on the porch, just staring ahead. I sat down beside him without saying anything. I feel embarrassed, he admitted after a while. That's normal, I replied. I thought I was smarter than this. Smart people make bad choices too, I said. The difference is what they do after. He let out a slow breath. I deserved that call. Yes, he did. The day he sold the motorcycle, he handed me the envelope of cash from the buyer. First payment, he said simply. I didn't take it. You give that to the bank, I replied. He nodded. That moment was important, not because of the money, but because for the first time he wasn't trying to make it easier for himself. He was facing it directly. If you've ever had someone close to you hurt you financially or emotionally, you know the real question isn't whether they say sorry, it's whether they change, and change doesn't show up in speeches. It shows up in sacrifice. One night he sat across from me and said something that made my throat tighten. I always thought you were just soft, he admitted, like you'd always forgive anything. I gave a small, tired smile. I am soft, I said, but I'm not weak, he nodded slowly. I see that now. That might have been the most important shift of all, because when someone sees you clearly for the first time, the relationship resets. He still lived under my roof. He still ate at my table, but the dynamic had changed. I wasn't just the safety net anymore. I was a boundary, and strangely, I felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because I no longer felt invisible. The debt would take years to repay. The credit would take time to rebuild. But something else had already begun repairing, the understanding between us. Still, forgiveness isn't instant, and just when I thought we were settling into this new normal, something happened that tested whether his change was real or temporary. For a while things moved in a steady rhythm. He worked more, slept less, paid what he could. The house felt calmer even if it wasn't warm like before. We were rebuilding something brick by brick. And I started to believe maybe this really had changed him. But growth gets tested when no one is watching. About 6 weeks after the investigation closed, I received a small notification from my bank. Not a new credit card. Not a loan, just a soft alert saying someone attempted to log into one of my old financial accounts from a device that wasn't recognized. My heart didn't race like it did the first time. It just tightened. I checked the details. The attempt was blocked, no access granted, but the device location, it was from inside my own house. I didn't confront him immediately. I waited. That evening I sat at the kitchen table while he came in from work. He looked exhausted. Grease on his shirt, dark circles under his eyes. He had been working hard, that was obvious. Long day, I asked. He sighed, dropping his keys on the counter. I nodded slowly. Did you try logging into my savings account today? The question landed quietly. His body stiffened for just a second, then he shook his head. No, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse. I just looked at him steadily. The bank flagged an attempt, I said softly. From inside this house, he hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. It wasn't what you think, he said quickly. I needed to check something. Check what? I asked calmly. If there was anything I could borrow temporarily, he admitted, voice dropping. There it was again, temporary. The word echoed in my mind like a warning bell. My chest felt heavy but not shocked. Not like before, this wasn't the same as opening credit cards, but it was the same thinking pattern. You didn't ask, I said quietly. I didn't actually take anything, he replied defensively. I just looked, you didn't ask, I repeated. Silence filled the room. He ran a hand over his face. I panicked. The payment plan is heavier than I thought. I'm falling behind already. Sigh, there it was. Fear doesn't excuse dishonesty. You could have come to me, I said. I didn't want you to think I was failing again. You already failed once, I replied gently. Trying to hide it again is worse. That hit him hard. I could see it in his eyes. I'm trying, he said quietly. I know, I answered, but trying doesn't mean you get to cross lines. We stood there in the kitchen, both of us tired. Both of us aware that this moment mattered more than it looked on the surface, because this wasn't about money anymore. It was about whether he truly understood boundaries, or if he only respected them when consequences were immediate. I didn't take anything, he repeated, almost pleading, and I'm grateful for that, I said softly. But you thought about it, he didn't deny it. That honesty, at least, was progress. I walked to the table and sat down. You need to hear this clearly, I said. One mistake can be a lesson. Repeating the mindset is a pattern. He lowered himself into the chair across from me. I won't help you financially right now, I continued, not because I don't love you, but because you need to learn how to stabilize without shortcuts. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. I don't want shortcuts anymore, he said quietly. Then prove it, I replied. He swallowed. I will. We sat in silence for a while. It wasn't hostile, it was serious. Finally, he spoke again. When they called me from the fraud department, my voice changed because I realized something. What? I asked. I realized you were done protecting my bad decisions. Yes, that was it. Still your mother, I said gently. But I'm not your shield from consequences, he nodded slowly. I get that now. Do you really? I wondered silently. If you've ever tried to rebuild trust with someone who hurt you, you know it's not a straight line, there are steps forward. Then small slips back. The real question is whether they correct themselves without being forced. That night, he came to my room again before bed. I changed the Wi-Fi password, he said softly, for your accounts. You can set new ones privately. That small action meant more than he probably realized. He was choosing to remove access, choosing boundaries. Maybe this was what real change looked like, not perfection. But awareness still. Trust doesn't return just because someone says the right words. And the final test of whether he truly learned his lesson came sooner than either of us expected. The final test didn't come in a dramatic way. No police, no shouting, no giant disaster. It came quietly, the way real life usually does. 3 months after everything happened, I received a letter in the mail from one of the credit bureaus. I opened it slowly at the kitchen table, almost afraid to look. My hands were steady now. I wasn't the same woman who laughed nervously at a $42,000 number anymore. The investigation had officially cleared my name. The fraudulent accounts were removed from my report completely. My credit score had already started climbing back up. Not perfect, not fully healed, but recovering. I let out a long breath. Thank you, I whispered to no one in particular. That evening, I told him. They removed everything from my record, I said calmly while he was washing dishes. He turned around quickly. That's good, he said. And I could see real relief on his face, not for himself, for me. They also sent confirmation that the full balance is now officially yours, I added. He nodded slowly. I know. His tone didn't carry panic anymore. It carried acceptance. Over the past 3 months, he had sold the motorcycle, picked up extra shifts, cut down his spending completely. I watched him come home exhausted but focused. I saw him sit at the table calculating payments carefully. No more avoiding numbers, no more pretending things were temporary. One night, he surprised me. He handed me a small envelope. What's this? I asked. First savings deposit, he said. Not yours, mine, clean money, in my name. I looked at him for a moment. This wasn't about the amount inside that envelope. It was about the pride in his voice. I'm building my credit the right way now, he added. Secured card. Small limit, no shortcuts. I nodded slowly. Good. There was a quiet pause between us. I hate that it took something this big for me to grow up, he admitted. I gave a small sigh. Some lessons are expensive. He let out a soft, tired laugh. 42,000 expensive. Ha ha ha. We both laughed lightly for the first time in months, not because it was funny, but because it no longer felt like a secret wound. It felt like a scar still visible but healing. The real final test came a week later. I accidentally left my wallet on the kitchen counter while I went to take a shower. When I came back out, it was still there. Exactly where I left it. That might sound small, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to check it. That was the test, not whether he would steal again, but whether I could breathe in my own house without suspicion. He walked into the kitchen a few minutes later and saw me holding my wallet. Our eyes met for just a second. No words were needed. He understood what that moment meant. "I won't ever put you in that position again," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, and this time I believed him. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means deciding not to live in constant fear of the past. The debt will take years for him to finish paying. His credit will take time to rebuild fully. But something else rebuilt faster: respect, not the kind of respect that comes from fear, the kind that comes from boundaries. I used to think being a good mother meant absorbing everything quietly. Protecting, covering, fixing. But I learned something through this. Sometimes love says no, sometimes love makes the call, sometimes love lets the bank speak so your child finally hears the seriousness in someone else's voice. If you've stayed with this story until now, you understand that this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about accountability. It was about a mother realizing that shielding her son from consequences was slowly turning him into someone weaker, and I refused to let that happen. He still lives with me for now. But things are different. He contributes more. He speaks more honestly. And most importantly, he asks. The other day he said, "Can I borrow your car tomorrow?" Can I? Two small words, but they meant everything. I smiled and handed him the keys, because this time it was asked, and that's the difference between love without boundaries and love with strength. If stories like this remind you that strength can be quiet, that growth can be painful, and that boundaries can save relationships instead of destroy them, subscribe and stay. There are more stories about real life, real consequences, and real change waiting for you, because sometimes the strongest thing you can say as a parent is simply this: enough.